it's Jessica. Welcome and welcome back to the Not Carrie Bradshaw YouTube channel / podcast where I discuss all things style, wellness, pop culture, and whatever else comes up from week to week. And this week, I'm so excited for you guys to hear my conversation with Dominique Jean-Louis, who is the chief historian at the Center for Brooklyn History. I fell in love with her content a couple of years ago because she's extremely passionate about history, about Brooklyn, and she has the knowledge. I feel like a lot of people these days are very passionate, but they don't necessarily have the knowledge or the wisdom to back that passion up. You know, passionate going in a questionable direction. But she is so incredible, so smart, like genuinely smart. And I don't just mean from a learned perspective. I mean, you have a great capacity for critical thinking, and I love people like that. So I hope you guys enjoy this episode. We actually ended up talking about a lot of the themes surrounding Sinners before either of us had even seen the movie. So we did this conversation very late night so that we could both fit it into our schedules, and I'm so grateful for her flexibility. So I got up the next day and I went to go see the movie, and the whole time I'm watching, I'm thinking about how we were just having this conversation about the importance of history for Black people and people of color, and how if we have more knowledge of each other's history, that our shared experiences really would transcend time and would transcend these kind of borders or superficial borders that people have put up around us to make us feel much more separate than we really should be. And so I'm watching Sinners and I'm looking at the scene where they're talking about how music transcends time and identity and space and culture, and how so many things come together for the joy of all kinds of different people up until a point. We can have a separate conversation about Sinners if that's something that y'all are into, but I hope that you can glean from our little chat some of those themes that we were talking about, not even knowing that we were discussing this movie that is having tremendous success, no matter how people are trying to downplay it or spin these different kinds of news stories, which I want to believe that they're just doing that for clickbait, and they don't sincerely mean to downplay the accomplishments of Black people. But as I'm saying that out loud, I know what the truth is. So I hope you guys enjoy this episode. This week's fashion segment, I'm going to be very brief. I have decided, per a conversation with another friend who is also starting a new job, moving to a new country, how we want to expand our fashion palette a bit. And one aesthetic that I've always been into from the time that I started studying fashion was women in well-tailored menswear. When I first learned about Yves Saint Laurent and that signature smoking tuxedo, I was like, this is the best thing I've ever seen. Like, I believe it's Marlene Dietrich who was banned from hotels and from clubs because it was considered unseemly or inappropriate for a woman to be wearing a suit or to be wearing pants. And she was this rebel in a tuxedo, which is like at the height of formal dressing. And I just always found that very fascinating. So even though people are saying it's a recession indicator that menswear is back for women, for me, it never left. It entered my consciousness and stayed. So in this new role, I kind of want to explore it a little bit. And my friend was saying, you can still be Fran Fine by night, but you can totally be Cece Babcock by day. And if you are a fan of The Nanny, if you go back and you look, Cece Babcock really had amazing style. It was just often overshadowed by Nanny Fine because she was, number one, the star of the show, but number two, Nanny Fine's style kind of took up the whole room. It was colorful, it was bright, it was fitted, it was girly, it was all these things. It was very, very fashion with a capital F in the most approachable way. It wasn't pretentious. I didn't feel that the way Nanny Fine wore designer was in a pretentious way. She was very much an around the way girl who also had impeccable taste. And that kind of got overshadowed by what the character of Cece represented, right? She's this conservative, very polished, very, upper crust kind of woman. And I think that a part of the conversation to be had there was that Nanny Fine was still just as significant, just as important, just as smart, just as capable as Cece, who was this like formally educated and well-bred woman. So I think that there was always this conversation kind of happening between the two of them about identity. And, around here we love, double consciousness and duality and all of that stuff. So I'm excited to, yeah, like I said, expand my fashion palette to include some more oversized and some more menswear inspired kind of looks. So stay tuned for that journey. Follow me on my TikTok and my Instagram and whatnot. So I'm going to shut up so we can get into this episode. I really hope you guys enjoy it. And be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, rate, review, and all of the things. And another thing, before I forget, there are some hot takes about this movie, Sinners, which I cannot tell you how much I loved it enough. I cried several times. I teared up several times, especially when Delroy Lindo was telling a story about his friend getting lynched. And where you thought he was going to cry, he started to hum and created a whole song. That spoke to me on so many levels, because I have literally been sitting around with elders where they have done that, where instead of crying or weeping, it comes out as like a moan or a hum or like that. I've seen that happen so much in real life that I didn't know what it would mean to me to see it on a screen. And I think that that is a kind of vulnerability that you can transmute that kind of pain into something beautiful. I love that. But I said that to say, y'all are writing some fan fictions about Annie and Mary and Smoke and Stack. Some of the things that y'all are saying happened or would have happened, you're not staying true to the source material. And I want y'all to know that that's why fan fiction exists. If you want to live in a world or see a world where Annie was a kept woman, you can absolutely write that fanfic. Okay, y'all stay tuned. Bye. Okay. So thank you again for being with me, for being flexible. It means the world, because it's, and here's what, we're happy to be booked and busy and all the things. So before we begin, please tell my audience who you are, what you do, and why.
Sure. So my name is Dominique Jean-Louis. I guess my official title professionally is I'm the chief historian at the Center for Brooklyn History within the Brooklyn Public Library system. That's kind of my job, but who I am, I'm a public historian, I'm a New Yorker, I'm a Haitian American. Those three things are very, very intertwined. And pretty much described everything you would need to know about me. I knew an academic historian usually by definition works within a university, and I knew I didn't want to work within a university, but that wasn't why I wanted to be a public historian. I definitely felt that, definitions abound, but to me, a public historian is like a definition of who I see my audience as, because I think, look, there are a lot of academic historians who write for everybody, they want their work to be applicable to or accessible to everybody. And a lot of people succeed in that. We've especially seen a lot of quote unquote academic historians lately, like publish in a trade press. Like I just this week finished Martha Jones's book, The Trouble of Color, which is about her family. It's with a trade press. There's no footnotes. So it's not to say that a quote unquote academic historian can't have a public audience, but I feel like adding the public makes it very clear that that's who I do the work for, that's who it's designed for, who I have in mind. And then, at least specific to me, where I quote unquote publish my work is in public venues. I'm actually not published as an academic. I've written like blog posts and some reviews in academic journals, but I've never published my own research. All of my own research has been in exhibitions or public talks or workshops and, walking tours, that kind of thing. So that's where I like to focus my work. And so that's where I see the kind of public coming in, is really who I'm trained to present my work to. And it is just different. I think a lot of times, not to talk smack about my field, but I feel like a lot of people think of public history as like, oh, if you can't get a job as a public historian, it's like, the second tier, but it's its own field with its own training, with its own difficulties. I don't think that public history, whether that's curating in a museum or, working as like a tour guide or any of these other things, I don't find it in particular any less challenging than any other form of history. It's just its own thing. You have a different kind of training, you have a different kind of experience that you need. But public history is kind of its own field with its own canon, its own guidelines, its own questions. So that's really what guides me to want to be a public history. It's who I see myself kind of in fellowship with.
I think that's important. I'm always really happy to meet people who have found their thing. I think that you carry
Oh,
yourself in the world differently when you have something that you're very passionate about, like whether it's very niche or very common or whatever. So
mhm.
I think that that's also what drew me to your content, because like your tweets are so, you have so much passion behind like your perspectives, and then you also have the facts and the literal history to back those things up. So I think for those reasons, and again as a casual fan of history, um I'm just curious, like, I know for me why history is important, but I feel it feels like right now
Mhm.
politically it's
Yeah.
even more important. Why do you think that is? Like, what is the material value of history during a time like this?
I feel like I can answer that question in two different ways. And I mean, I'll just start off by saying that, for me, history is always important. Like, it feels more relevant or it feels more urgent, but I always feel that sense that history is very front of mind. And I often attribute that to being Haitian. I sometimes say that, like, I'm surprised that anyone who's Haitian doesn't become a historian because we just live our history. You'll be, like chatting with the uncles on the porch, during a family gathering, and they're just as likely to be bringing up Jean-Jacques Dessalines from the 18th century as they are contemporary political figures. That the history of it, which is, of course, also the pride of that history for Haitians, as the first Black Republic, um, just feels present. It's always part of the conversation. It's always relevant. It's always something you wear on your sleeve. So I think definitely my upbringing and my background has led me to a sense. I've never had the sense that history isn't something that is with us all the time.
Yeah. And I think maybe that's a thing for people of color as well. Like, I know just like as a Black American being from Atlanta, which is the
Oh
home
yeah.
of so much of the civil rights movement. And it was always, to your point, we never not knew what it meant to be a Black person, what it meant to be Black American, what our contributions are. And I mean, like it was around you all the time, these kind of historical neighborhoods and things like that. And I wonder if that is a thing for like Black people or people of color, that we kind of carry that with us all the time.
I think so, especially because, unfortunately in this country, race has so much to do with how space is organized, and specifically, space is often organized in a way that diminishes the rights and access of people of color, and especially Black people, and enhances and augments the accessibility and the resources of white people. That is often how the country is organized. So, looking at Atlanta or New York, when you're looking at where the highways are, when you're looking at how neighborhoods are laid out, or their proximity to natural resources or the water table or any of these kinds of things, it does feel front of mind because it is literally how you move through space. And I think you're aware of that as a person of color because you're always aware. It's famously Du Bois's double consciousness. You're very aware of how it is for other people from the outside looking in, and you're also aware of what it is from the inside looking out. So I do think there's a way that it's front of mind, but it's funny. I always chalked it up to living in New York, where at least the more you read about the history, the more you feel it. Like you just see these historic neighborhoods or the neighborhoods that don't exist anymore, that you're walking through Central Park and you're like, this used to be Seneca Village, or you're walking through Lincoln Center and thinking this used to be San Juan Hill. So even if it doesn't exist as a site for people of color, you kind of have that historical awareness. But I have to say, the more that I research, um, America more generally, because my degree is in U.S. history. I'm a New York City historian, but I have done a lot of studying across the country, especially centering Black history. And I don't think that's unique to cities. I don't think that's unique to the Northeast. The more I learn about Nebraska and Kansas, the more it's the same thing. I mean, the stories are different, the timeline is different, but I think that sense of we are where we are for a reason, and some of those reasons are painful, and some of those reasons are really prideful. I think that is Black history, at least in the United States. And I'm not as deeply grounded as a transnational scholar as maybe I could be, but you start researching Brazil, you start researching South America, or, certainly Africa, all over the continent. And I think that is just part of it. I think we just really carry a sense of where we've been, in part because being part of the diaspora, you're also so aware of how it could have gone the other way. I like tell this story all the time, but whenever I'm buying fabric at the Malcolm Shabazz market on 116th Street, it's a lot of women from Western Africa who run those stalls. And I remember I was buying fabric once, and she was kind of cutting it, so we're making small talk, and she asked me where my people are from, and I say Haiti, and she goes, "Oh, so we're cousins. I'm from Benin." And I was so like moved by it, because of course that is the history, that people were kidnapped from what is now Benin and brought to Haiti. And so it's kind of nice to be like, oh my gosh, centuries later, across an ocean later, we both find ourselves, sitting here in Harlem. But also, there are all these examples of what could have been, like, folks who immigrate here from Ghana, they could have been brought over in a slave ship, or people who speak Portuguese because they're from Brazil, they could have just as easily been in, Antigua. That, this sense of what colonialism did to us also means
Yeah.
that we're constantly confronted with, it could have been this way, it could have been this way. And it almost feels like expedient to know not just our own history, but each other's histories, just
Yeah.
because so we can be, when we're all together, we can acknowledge those differences, but also just have that, like, it's us feeling
Yeah,
that
this
it
like
was like
shared kind of experience. That was really, really different for me when I moved here. And people were like, "What are you?" And I was like, "I'm obviously Black. Like, I am a phenotypically, like, I'm a Black person." Like, I was like, "What do you mean?" And they're like, "Where are your people from?" And I said, "The South." And they were
Mhm.
like, "Well, where before that?" And I was like, "Why would I know that?" And it was this ongoing thing of, until I moved here, I had never experienced justifying being
Mhm.
a Black American or defending
Right,
being
right.
a Black American, because there's, unfortunately, we see the diaspora wars happening
Of
all the
course.
time on the timeline. And I've questioned, to your point, are they not aware, the people who look at Black Americans as if we don't have culture and history, as if we're uneducated, all of these actually like pretty conservative views against
Mhm.
us, prejudiced, racist views against us. I'm like, do they just not know our history? Do they not
Right.
know? And I don't want to be, out about at Trader Joe's, like trying to explain to somebody, like, I don't know if you know how it worked, but
Right.
I don't know that. You know what
Right,
I'm
right.
saying? And I do, to your point, I wish that there was more shared knowledge about our history, and people not even understanding. One of my favorite podcasts that I used to listen to was See Something, Say Something,
Mhm.
about being Muslim American. And
Mhm.
they always made a point to talk about how difficult it was for Black Muslims in
Mhm.
America. That it's
Oh,
like
yeah.
people just don't take us seriously, like, in this way. And it's like, well, if it weren't for the work of our elders and our ancestors, a huge part of the reason why you're able to be in this country is because
Mhm.
of that Immigration Act. And that, and it's
Right.
this desire
Not
that,
to
oh, I just wish
mention,
they knew.
at work, we have, so before, Center for Brooklyn History is a result of a merger between the former Brooklyn Historical Society and the Brooklyn Public Library. That merger took place in 2020. But before the merger in 2018, the former Brooklyn Historical Society had done this big public history project about Muslims in Brooklyn. So it was an exhibition, it was an oral history project, it was, in-person programming. This was all pre-pandemic. But as part of that, they also made a purchase of the first land deed of a that is known of a Muslim person owning land in the United States, and it was in Brooklyn in the 17th century by a black man who's believed to be like from Morocco. So we're talking about black Muslims. It's also just kind of like the history of both, what has the immigration patterns, as you've said, kind of the Hart-Celler Immigration Act, which is very much a product of civil rights movement and legislation in the 1960s, but it's also then connecting that new immigration to a deeply diverse America that existed since before this country was founded. As to your point about Black Americans and the culture, I think that that's also a piece of it, is that it predates America. That by the time 76 rolls around, we have had already centuries of what enslavement looked like in this country, and syncretization of different cultures from West Africa, finding one another, in a rice field in South Carolina and having to build a way out of no way. We're not talking about something that's like recent. This is centuries of a culture forming, and different cultures clashing and producing new culture.
Yeah.
And I think the America piece gets in the way of the cultural piece,
I
because
think so
that
as well.
predates America by a long shot. Even, the date of 1619 is so often given, but it's way before that, even when you're looking at like Florida, for example, and the Spanish. So, we're really talking about many centuries of this culture forming. And, on the flip side too, you look at, Africa and what we now see as these like lines of the countries. Those kingdoms look very different hundreds of years ago. And the first enslaved people are being brought to the Americas. Africa doesn't look like it looks now. So a lot of the cultures that we kind of can identify as African in these discrete ways, because we see these like national boundaries, are very, very different. The same
Yeah.
way that our culture is very, very different from, the 16th century to now, or, Black American culture is very different. So it's this weird double-edged sword of, we all care a lot about this history, but there's big blind spots. And much like, so the exhibition that I just put up this year about the history of slavery in Brooklyn, mostly because I don't think people know that there was slavery in Brooklyn, so we wanted to get that out and tell some of the stories around it, and produce some of the documents that help us show what slavery looks like in Brooklyn. Um, Part of what we do in that exhibition is really tying it to exactly that, just kind of explaining that there is this history. And one of the points that I make often when I give tours is that, if you don't know, that's not necessarily your fault, because it's not about shame. I don't think shame is useful. It just doesn't have a place in researching history or learning it. Why would, shame come in? It's more of just being aware, and it's not necessarily your fault if you're not aware. But once you are aware, how does that change how you move in the world? How does that change where you have curiosity? And,
Mhm.
when it comes to like desperate wars and all these things, I hope it's the same way. That, look, there are probably reasons why, if you are a new immigrant to America, you probably don't have a sense of the deep culture of Black America, because where would you have learned that? It wasn't necessarily taught to you. But once it is brought to your attention, the hope is that you would want to learn more. The hope is that that would change the way that you see the stories you have been given, and kind of maybe can identify the gaps and the inadequacies of the information.
Yeah.
And like, look, I get it. I'm a nerd about these things. We were just chatting before we started the this kind of conversation, that I'm taking a week off and I'm still reading history in my spare time. I know that what I do with all the time in the world on my off day is still like learning history and taking notes in notebook. That's not everybody. People deserve to not kind of have their brain all that. You don't have to be learning all day every day. I totally get that people are just trying to
Mhm.
survive,
Yeah.
but it it helps to know. And I hope that people want to know. And that's part of why, like, public history is that, like, you don't have to be, getting up early on a Saturday and reporting to the library to, like, do homework.
Yeah.
That hopefully, we have exhibitions in the subway stations where it's just on your way to work, maybe taking a little bit. So part of what public history is designed to do is, like, we get it, you're busy, ton of strains on your time and your attention. Here's something. Take it and run, or take it and choose to dig deeper, but, try to bring that history to your attention if you can.
Yeah, I have a friend where we often talk about how curiosity just seems to be this lost art almost. And I feel like the people who are living the most are the people who are curious, are the people who are riding the subway and noticing the little poetry on the
Mhm.
subway series.
Poetry in motion, yeah, and
Yeah,
yeah.
and then you Google and you're like, "Who is this person? Oh, okay, and what did they do?" It's these little things of I remember my first year living here, I was interning at Oscar de la Renta, and that whole thing, that happens to Black women in corporate spaces where you go from, like, the favorite what is it? Pet
Oh, threat
to
to pet? Pet to threat,
yeah,
yeah.
that whole thing. So this woman
Mhm.
loved me day one, and then, like, a couple weeks in, I was just like, "Girl, did something happen?" I never found out, but anyway, back when during her time period of being nice,
Mhm.
she was like, "No matter how long you live here, don't ever forget to just look up sometimes." And I
Oh,
think
yeah.
about that all the time because in a city like this, you can be so tempted to be it can be a really lonely place. And that was surprising to me when I moved
Oh,
here.
yeah, 'cause you're
'Cause
surrounded by people. It's funny,
yeah,
I totally agree with you. It's a city that's so rewarding if you are curious, because there are a million things. Like,
there's so
you
much.
mentioned art in motion, like, "Oh my god, I never noticed that piece of public art. Who's the artist? I don't know that name. Let me look them up." I feel like
Yeah.
that is how I go through the day, but I completely agree that it's tempting to kind of start to go on autopilot, because it's also a city that requires a lot from you, requires your focus, your attention, 'cause you know, um, claims of New York not being a safe place are majorly over exaggerating, but your head needs to be on a swivel. You need to be looking out.
Yeah.
You can't just zone
Yeah.
out. You have to be aware. So it's a place where you're kind of on and kind of keyed up all the time. So it's tempting to just kind of lock in
Yeah.
and go on
To have
autopilot.
those blinders on.
Exactly. But at the same time, I completely agree that in order for it to be worth it, you have to be willing to be engaged, to be surprised, to look into things further. I remember, um, I was in grad school for a long time. I think the average age to finish a PhD is 10 years, and it took me longer than that. And so I was working full time for most of when I was getting my degree. And I remember some of that was like cobbling together part time jobs to make a full time living. But I remember when I first got my first like full time salary position while I was in grad school, and I was like, okay, I'm like working in museums, I've got like benefits and a salary. I'm super excited because I had a little bit of security. And I kind of realized how easy it was to, clock in at 9, clock out at 5 or afterwards, go home. Oh, what's that new Netflix show someone's talking about? Oh, let me make this Trader Joe's meal. And it took me a little bit. And I was like, girl, you could be doing that in Minneapolis. You could be doing that in Bayonne, New Jersey. If you are going to be here, you cannot be going home, watching whatever on TV,
You can get in a
having
rut
a
really easily. And the
exactly,
pandemic
and there's nothing wrong with it, but, like, you're
yeah.
paying these rents, you have these accesses, and if I feel very strongly, and this is maybe not the most generous way to think, but, like, if you are taking as full advantage as you can, you're taking someone's spot. Lots of people wanna be here. Lots of people want access to the things you have access to. If you're not taking advantage, I don't like the scarcity mindset of it, but I keep thinking like someone else who has what you have would be dying to do more with it. Are
Yeah.
you really just going to sit here and like listen, comfort's important. You can't be on all the time, but I completely agree, and this is how I choose to live my life, that this is a city that the rewards are infinite. If you are curious and you want to dive in and you want to go places you've never been, experience things you've never experienced, or learn things you've never known. You can't, I mean, I know that now from being on vacation, and like 7 days isn't enough. Oh my God, I need a lifetime of wandering this city and going to exhibitions and, stopping and reading the plaque at the historic landmarks, that there is literally infinity to learn. And, I say that as someone who loves history, but even if you don't, man, like it just
It's
enriches the
a
everyday
lot.
to
Yeah.
see what's beneath it.
Yeah, it's a lot to see, and so I always like when people say that they're visiting, they're like, "What should I do?" I'm like, Y'all don't realize how big of a question that is. You can do anything here. You can do
Anything.
anything. Like everything is here." And to your point, I found myself in a very similar rut,
Mhm.
um, because I was not very happy, like, in this 10-year job, right? And I just remember thinking, like, "I need a break. I need a break. I need a break. I
Mhm.
need a break so that I can, like," I just felt, like, kinda, like, bogged down.
It's
I was recovering
relentless.
from a breakup and, like,
Mhm.
I was like, "Oh my god, I need a break." And then the pandemic happened, and I was like, "Did I will this? Like, am I a witch? Did I will this to happen?" But from being able to work from home for 2.5 years,
Mhm.
I got to explore so much more of my neighborhood, that my own neighborhood that I'd never explored
It is
before.
true. Oh my god, I felt like Belle from Beauty and the Beast during the
Yes!
pandemic, like, where it's just, there goes the baker, there goes my neighbor, like, you just and listen, I love exploring the city, like, nothing makes me happier than to take a day where I'm off and just drop myself in another borough and just explore, walk around, like, my goal this whole week is spend at least part of the day in another borough, walk 15 miles a day, just going all over, doing everything, but it's also like it's easy to forget that your neighborhood is also contains multitudes and infinity, and it was just, I mean, so many people left during the pandemic, so it was also such like beautiful solidarity and just like, who are my neighbors?
I miss that. Okay, obviously, the pandemic, it wasn't good,
Right,
obviously, but I
still with us, yeah.
cannot lie. I sometimes miss that feeling of camaraderie that we had. It felt like here, at least, we were
Oh
really
yeah.
banded together in this, common struggle. And it felt like just this sense of togetherness. Like, I just remember, like, I was going on, like, I was walking almost every day, like 3 to 8 miles, just
Right,
depending on
right.
how I felt.
They
And
said the whole pandemic that like you can only explore as far as your bladder, right? Everything's closed.
yeah, yeah.
So
So I just remember the looks on everybody's faces as we're passing each other, just like I see
Mhm.
you, and I'm glad you're here. It was
Yeah.
this quiet, and I can even honestly, I can remember that feeling after the first election, Trump's first election. I remember the palpable feeling of collective sadness in the city. It was like the subway was just quiet in a way that it like everybody was you know what I mean? But
Mhm.
there was this kind of somberness to it. But like during lockdown, there I don't know, like I got to explore so much. And even to your point, there was something that you posted that you guys were having at the historical society.
Center for Brooklyn History? Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh,
And the map making event, and it was
yeah,
so
collaging.
lovely. It was so lovely. I sat next to these 2 older Black women and
Mhm.
I'm just listening to their life stories, and they're talking about what because they're empty nesters, and one of them was widowed, and they're talking about what they were gonna do, and, "Oh, I think we should do this knitting class," and it filled me with so much hope of just community. I just love women in community. It makes me so happy. But even after I left there, I'm walking around the neighborhood and like it's one of my goals in life is to own a brownstone in Brooklyn. And I
Mhm.
was like, I've never fucking seen it. Where am I? It's so beautiful.
Oh my god, it's so beautiful, and it's so funny because, yeah, obviously during the lockdown and the pandemic, we are all working from home. I hated it. We're lucky enough to have the option at Brooklyn Public Library. I think it's like 1 or 2 days a week that you could work remotely. You will not catch me working from home. Like literally, if I have like Con Ed needs to come read the meter, I will schedule it as early as possible so I can get it over with and come to the office. In part because I'm just more productive in an office than I am at home. But it's also just like it's a beautiful building in a beautiful neighborhood. Things are a little busy now. I'm working on 3 exhibitions simultaneously, but back a year or two ago when I had a little less going on, I used to take my lunch hour and like walk down to the Brooklyn Bridge Promenade. It is less than a 10-minute
Yes.
walk, and you can
Yes.
just, it's a lovely part of town. And it's funny because it's a challenge in our work too, because while we do all we can to make it enticing for people to come to our buildings, we do events like the one you went to, or we have exhibitions up. Brooklyn Heights is about as close to Manhattan you can get without crossing the river. Like, which means that if you're coming in from Brownsville or East New York or, Marine Park, it's going to be really far for you to get there. So part of that is also like, I love where our building is. We're lucky to have a landmarked building in such a beautiful neighborhood, but we're also trying to think about like, well, how can we bring history to people?
Yeah.
Because the burden of coming all the way to the Borough Hall stop is not everyone's top of their list.
Yeah, it was a
We,
trek.
I do love being there every day very much.
Yeah, it was a trek. Before you go, I do want to get your thoughts because I am like a lifelong student of fashion, much like you. I realized that I wanted to study fashion when I was so close to finishing undergrad. So I am now like decolonizing my own fashion education. Like I have 2 degrees in the study of like the business of fashion, and but even
Oh,
from the
interesting.
historical perspective, I was like, it never even occurred to me to question where we were
Mhm.
in that study. So now I'm, following and interacting with and interviewing Black fashion scholars,
Mhm.
um, where one of them was like, listen, you can't take Black Americans out of the fashion history conversation. We picked the
Mhm.
cotton.
Yeah.
And I attended a lecture that he hosted. This guy wrote this really amazing book about the white immigrants who made the clothes that enslaved people wore.
Oh,
And it
sure.
speaks to this whole conversation that we're always having, really, about being conscious of how you shop and what you know what I mean? And so these were poorer immigrants who these were women that this gave them an economy, this gave them some semblance of financial freedom, but
Mhm.
it was at the expense that they were dressing enslaved people. And
Oh,
it
yeah.
was this really interesting conversation about like the moral economy of, and people kind of think, to your point, the North had nothing to do with slavery and this, and it was like, no, this was
It
an
was true.
interconnect. But anyway, I said all that to say, with the Met Gala coming up, what
Mhm.
are you looking forward to seeing? Especially because this is like the first time that I feel like Black people are really being centered in our
Right.
relationship to fashion. So I'm just
Mhm.
curious from a historian's perspective, like what are
Right.
you hoping to see or looking forward to?
So there are a number of things because, like you, I've always been interested in fashion. I like the sample I submitted for grad school was a paper about fashion and emancipation, women's fashion and
Okay,
emancipation.
I would love to see that.
Oh my God. It was like, I'll have to send you the book list for it because it was like transnational, like Jamaica and South Carolina. So much happening about how women like dress themselves for freedom. Such a fascinating topic. And I'm such a fashion girly. Like literally when fall and spring fashion week rolls around, I'm like glued to, back it used to be style.com and then
Yeah,
now I guess it's Vogue Runway.
yep.
But that I like literally with the dial-up connection. I remember going to like runway.com and looking at so I'm hugely into fashion. So I'm always just interested in like the spectacle of it. I'm interested to see what the designers dressing, attendees, what they come up with. But I have to say as a historian, even in just the last year, so I recently read Towley Goff's Dark Laboratory. Um, I actually can't remember. I'm pretty sure she's a historian. It's a very kind of interdisciplinary study of climate change and colonialism and the Caribbean. And to your point about, the material, the garments that are made for enslaved people by these immigrant people, there's so much of an emphasis on basically the same uh, uh, greed that creates colonialism and underdevelops and exploits the Caribbean in ways that now create the climate crisis. Like one of her big arguments in that book is that the climate crisis doesn't begin with the industrial revolution. It really begins with the colonization of the Caribbean. And the point's so excellently made, and she's thinking about the natural world. So, and of course, thinking more generally about today's climate crisis, I'm really, really interested in materiality and how that manifests. Because of course, we want to see beautiful people wearing beautiful clothes. That's why they hold it. The more photographs that are taken, the more spectacle that's created, the more money they raise to do these exhibitions. That is literally built into the business model. But Fashion is one of the biggest drivers of waste, of like plastic waste and material waste in this in the not even in this country, globally, and as an accelerant of climate crisis, which we know the effects of those are felt most deeply in the more underdeveloped regions of the world, and not necessarily in a place like New York City, which is insulated from climate crisis in certain ways. So I'm really interested in materiality. And I recently got to see the FIT Museum, which is one of my favorite museums in the city, because we forget FIT is a state university. It is
I
not a private.
graduated from FIT.
Oh, there you go. So yeah, it is like a fashion school for the people, but it's also like world renowned for the depth of their study. So they did an exhibition. I forget the name of it. It was basically about like glitter. And there was a whole section. It was brilliantly done. It was beautiful clothes, as you can imagine, glitter, sequins, all sparkle. But there was a whole section on materiality and how what are sequins or what is glitter but small pieces of plastic? Well, microplastics are an enormous global issue in terms of habitat, in terms of biohazard, like for all these reasons. So both how is this beautiful material complicit in um, uh, toxic practices, and also what are other materials? How can we think about cellulose and fish scales and other things that can be used to give us that effect but are more sustainable? So, and I just was so inspired by that exhibition, in part because it was free and open late, because the FIT Museum is a beautiful, perfect model of, education and spectacle. But yeah, it's a beautiful exhibition. You see the clothes, they're gorgeous, they're showing off their collections and how well they care for these clothes, the way you would expect any fashion exhibition to do. But it's also deeply concerned with the moment it's in and interested in teaching you more. This is how these beautiful things can present a hazard. Here's how another model for beauty can influence the globe very differently. And so I'm hyper interested in materiality because, like said about the garments that enslaved people were wearing, when we think about the history of dandyism and Monica Miller's excellent book, a lot of the time periods we're talking about, those are materials that are fraught, to say it lightly, with either slavery or, labor issues. Like even after slavery ends, you're thinking about the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire and child labor.
Yeah.
And so how can we now, in the 21st century, knowing what we know about materiality, about the plants that created the linen and the cotton and the silk, how can we use that lens to the very material that these clothes are made out of and think about climate change and think about labor practices and think about where these materials are grown and monoculture agriculture? I know I sound like such a like such a dweeb and Debbie Downer.
No,
But
I
I'm really,
think about
because
this a
for
lot.
instance, in the exhibition, this like video feature of like this one girl who's making compostable and biodegradable sequins, and kind of how or glitter, and how she goes about that was so cool to see, and the looks were good, right? So I'm hoping, or I'm confident, that you can do both. You can dress Zendaya and have her look absolutely spectacular, and also tell a story about those garments, how they were made, who made them, what are they made out of, and how does that reflect 2025? How does it, honor the history, but also honor the moment we're in? Not only do I want to see that, it can be done. It is not hard. It doesn't have to be, you know, dry and a downer and no one wants to hear it. There's ways to do that story. I'm a public historian, so I see these examples all the time in the field. There are ways to do it that's interesting, that's exciting, and that is also beautiful. I don't care to see more garments that are, made in typical ways, and there's no acknowledgement of the labor and the materials and what it took to produce that garment, and is it sustainable. I just think we've done that. We know what happens when we do that. I'm ready for someone to tell a different story and also make it look good. And of course, I'll just wrap. I know I went on, but thinking about gender too, that dandyism, this is such an interesting moment to be thinking about fashion and gender, and even the fact that we have men and women shows, even the fact that, gender is being policed in certain ways. I want to both think about the sustainability and materiality of the clothes, but also, how can clothes um, help us in expanding a vision of the world that's a little bit more inclusive, that
Yeah.
makes people feel like there's a place for them in the world.
Yeah.
This is one of the first Met Gala, Met Gala topics and also exhibition topics that it's like you have the ability to change the place that people see for themselves in high fashion, in the world, in celebrity. With social media now, there's so many eyes on it. Our former social media manager at the New York Historical, when I was there, left that job to go be the social media manager at the Met, and I can only imagine the like intensity of the gala season, managing social media. But the intensity is because you have so many eyes on that one Monday in May, that if you do it right, you could really draw some attention to things that matter. Besides just fundraising for one, division of one museum. It's great that they fundraise. It's great that they can do the shows that they can do, but they could be doing more. They could be doing so much more for more kinds of people. So I would love to see them own the fact that, like, wait a minute, we have the power to do a little bit more here.
Yeah.
For those who are often shut out, we'll see. I'm
See,
excited.
we'll see.
Yeah.
I'm cautiously optimistic because I'm just like, this can to your point, this can either go really well in a number of different directions, or this could be a disaster where they kind of, I wasn't thrilled with the way they handled conversations around Orientalism with the China through the looking
Well,
glass. I was like, are
no.
you okay? Do you know we can hear you? You on speakerphone, girl. Like, we can hear you. Do you know that we can hear what you're saying? I wasn't surprised, but I'll say, maybe disappointed. So
Mhm.
I'm hoping that a lot of care is taken.
Yeah.
I know one of the scholars that's like helping with the exhibition, and he's one of my favorites. So Dr. Jonathan Square.
He's a good friend of mine. I just ran into him on Tuesday. We
I
went to
am
grad school together.
Oh my God, I'm such a huge, 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 huge fan of
No one's
his.
better than Jonathan. He's so
I've
good at what he
interviewed
does.
him for the podcast. I'm always stalking his pages and keeping up with his content. And I learned so much from him all the time. And he's such a doll.
Like the best person with the strongest mind. It's crazy too because we were in grad school together. This isn't even what he studied in grad. He's like a Latin Americanist. He wrote his dissertation on Brazil.
And that's what I'm saying. Like, I think it's so interesting how historians and scholars find their way to their thing. I think
Big
that
time.
is reflective of the beauty of a life well lived. You were curious, you looked, and you found something, and it pulled you in so much that you were like, "Oh, tell me everything." I
Oh
love
my God, no one embodies that better than Jonathan. I literally, yeah, I ran into him on Monday or Tuesday, like on Sixth Avenue, and like it makes my heart so full. I actually run into him quite a lot. We like walk the same corridors quite a bit, so I get to run into him every now and again. And just like, yeah, no, I'm so fascinated to kind of see his stamp on this exhibition because
it.
literally when they announced the theme for the exhibition, I was like, I'm reserving literally all judgment until I find out if he's involved. If he's involved, I'm cautiously optimistic. If he's not, I'm do it without me. I'm not interested at all. Count me out on this one, Chief. Like
Yeah.
knowing he's in, and Monica Miller is also so smart, so careful, so lovely. I've only met her like once, but familiar with her work. So I think, like you said, cautiously optimistic. They're pulling in good people. I think they're playing with some good ideas and the right people to, prop them up. But we'll see.
We'll see. Okay, so tell the people where they can find you, where they can find your work, where they should visit, because it's worth the
Yes.
trip.
All things the Center for Brooklyn History. I mean, I love my job so much. I am the luckiest person in the world. I have the coolest job. I never want another job. But the thing I like most about my job that I love so much is the ability to say, it's free for all. All are welcome. We're open 6 days a week. Like literally, your tax dollars already paid for it. You want to show up and use the bathroom and leave? Go for it, dog. If you want to like come and stay and take in the exhibition and make a research appointment, we will help you out. You want to come for a public program? Oh my God, I wish you would. We have them every week. So please stop by the Center for Brooklyn History. Our website's very long, but it's BKLYN Library/CBH. We literally have events going on every week that you can check out. And specifically, depending when you're listening to this, our exhibition Traces, Family History Research, and the Legacy of Slavery in Brooklyn will be up through the end of August 2025. And I give free weekly tours every Friday at 3 and then one Saturday a month at 2 p.m. So plenty of opportunities to get your fix straight from the source. And if not, you're welcome to come view the exhibition yourself 6 days a week. It's free. All are welcome. You can come as many times as you want. You can use the free Wi-Fi. You can come, like fix your hair in the mirror and then head off to your job interview. Like it's for the people.
I love that, and I love your enthusiasm, and I just love meeting and talking to people who love what they do because it's too rare. It shouldn't be so rare.
We live in a city where you get to see people just do like, passionate about the Hudson River, and that's what they spend all day doing, and like power to them. So I like to think I'm in good company amongst passionate people who really love what they do. But
Yeah.
I feel you. It's the best. I love learning more about your passion for fashion. I can kind of like see it coming out. And best of luck with your new gig and this new era.
We'll see. Look, we'll see. We're in an era of we'll see, and hopeful in all of the things. So enjoy the rest of your vacay. I will
Thank
definitely be
you.
making several more trips because that building
Beautiful.
is gorgeous, and maybe I can manifest owning one of those brownstones.
Listen, the thing about walking around in that neighborhood is it's always one with a for sale. So if you are an imaginative person like I am, you just sit there like, what if? Okay. And we also do programs like on like the Brownstone Boys have done a couple of programs with ours, like here's how people renovate their brownstones. So you can live vicariously through other people until it's your turn.
Until it's my turn. I love that. Thank you so much. Talk soon.
This was lovely. Talk soon. All right. Take
Bye.
care. Bye.